The recording has begun.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our August 25th regular town meeting. I would like to officially call this meeting to order at 6 p.m. Madam Town Clerk, would you please do a roll call?
Councilman Gutenberg,
Here.
Councilman McCormick,
Here.
Councilman Sampson,
Here.
Councilman Johnson,
Here.
Mayor James.
Here.
Madam Mayor, you have a quorum.
Thank you so much. And I ask if you all would please stand and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. Council, if you've had a moment to review the tonight's agenda, I will entertain a motion.
So moved.
All right, thank you. That's Councilman Gutenberg.
Yes.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All right. Any discussion? All in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Next on our agenda is a disclosure of a closed session that we held on August 18th. In accordance with the Maryland Open Meetings Act, Annotated Code of Maryland General Provisions Article, Chapter 3-211, we are required to include specific information in the meetings when a public body meets in closed session. To ensure full compliance, we have attached the written statement that includes the reason for closing the meeting, the statutory authority permitting the closed session, a listing of topics discussed, the individuals present, and the action taken. This document has been made part of the public record to maintain transparency and meet the legal requirements of the Act. Next, before we officially call the public hearing to order, I would like to ask the town clerk to review the procedures for tonight's hearing. Madam Clerk, would you please review the procedures for this evening's public hearing?
Town of La Plata public hearings are conducted in the following manner. Call to order, review of public notices, summary of town staff report and recommendation, questions by the town council to town staff, written documents entered into the record, speakers from the public, additional questions by the town council, and closing of the public hearing. Written documents for the record submitted in advance of the public hearing are provided to the presiding officer prior to the opening of the public hearing. At the appropriate time, the presiding officer will call registered speakers to the podium. Speakers who have registered to speak in advance via the town webpage will be recognized prior to speakers who register upon arrival at the public hearing. At the discretion of the presiding officer, speakers' comments may be limited to 3 minutes and may not be yielded to another person. A sign-in sheet was provided at the entry of council chambers for any public hearing attendees to register to speak if they have not already done so in advance via the town webpage. Registration to speak will end when the public hearing is opened.
All right, thank you so much. So thank you all for joining us. I would like to officially open this public hearing on the proposed zoning text amendment for accessory dwellings at 6:03 p.m. Madam Town Clerk, has the notice of public hearing been properly advertised?
Yes, Madam Mayor, for the record, this public hearing was advertised in the Southern Maryland News on July 31st, 2026 and August 7th, 2026. A copy of the certificate of publication and the advertisement is attached to the meeting agenda. Notice of this hearing was also posted on the Town of La Plata's website, Facebook page, and on Civic Clerk, the town's agenda and meeting management platform.
Thank you very much. Will staff provide recommendations, please, regarding the proposed renewal of this franchise agreement?
All right, good evening, Town Council. I'm Chuck Stevens, your Town Manager. I'm going to be joined this evening by Mr. Don Dooley, if you'll come on up, just to answer questions in case. Council, in your packet is an extensive staff report. It's very detailed. It's rather lengthy. So instead of going through, as I normally do, I'm just going to summarize it, what you're considering this evening, and then we'll open it up to questions to Mr. Dooley and myself. So what you're considering this evening is a zoning text amendment 04-2026, amending our accessory dwelling unit regulations in Chapter 191 of the zoning code. Last year, the General Assembly passed House Bill 1466 and Senate Bill 891, which limit how local governments can regulate ADUs or accessory dwelling units and require municipalities to bring their zoning into compliance by October 1st of this year. The town attorney has reviewed the draft amendments and found them legally sufficient. The Planning Commission held a public hearing on August 5th. No public comments were received and voted 5-0 with one member absent to recommend approval. Summarizing the key changes, and there's actually a very nice table in your packet. I believe it starts on page 14 of your packet that compares the summary of changes. But some of the key changes that I'll highlight here is that we will be removing the 5,000 square foot minimum lot size and the owner occupancy requirement, both mandated by the state. We will also remove the CBT zone from eligible districts since new single family homes are not allowed there anyway. And then conversely, we'll be adding some clarifying standards the state still allows us to keep. ADUs must stay subordinate to the primary home, capped at 75% of its floor area, only one ADU per lot. The height cannot exceed the primary dwelling, and we're expressly prohibiting short-term rentals and ADUs to keep them as permanent housing. There would be no fiscal impact to the town's operating budget by adopting this zoning text amendment this evening, and staff's recommendation for you this evening is going to be that council adopt ordinance 26-20 as presented. And that's all I have. Again, it was a very detailed and thorough staff report, I thought, and so rather than go through all of that, I would just pause here and we are prepared to answer any questions you may have.
All right. Does council have any questions for Mr. Stevens or Director Dooley? Councilman Sampson, go ahead.
Yes, I just had one question. Can you explain the difference between versus ADU, maybe a inner dwelling, I think is the term it uses, versus the short-term rental?
An ADU is basically intended as permanent secondary housing on the same lot. The short-term rental is not. It's basically meant as a guest space for tourism fundamentally.
Okay, so for ADU purposes, it's a permanent dwelling within inside a bigger dwelling.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, just a couple of comments maybe on this. So La Plata has had a ADU ordinance allowing ADUs on the books for about 7 years, and we've had zero takes on that. So there's been no building of ADUs in La Plata, even with that on the books. I think the most significant thing that the state has done to push compliance for ADUs into municipal zoning is the removal of the HOA covenant restrictions. I think that's pretty significant. I don't think, though, in my personal view, that will go. I don't think we're going to see any real change in the take rate of people, using this, because I think there's additional barriers potentially. And I talked a little bit about those when we had the first reading of this. And I think things in Maryland, there are some examples of some municipal and county governments that have a reasonable number of people that are building these. And one of the features that they tend to do that we're not talking about tonight, but I think it's something we could have a conversation about in La Plata through the Planning Commission to start with, is setting up a essentially a catalog of pre-approved designs, because individually that's the next barrier for anybody who was thinking of using this kind of living arrangement on their lot, is going to be a barrier to them, is this significant expense in going through and navigating the architecture and the design, and then the individual approvals of every single one is a unique thing. But I think this is really good that we're doing this. I think it's good that the state did this, and I think it's we're trying to address a real need in the community and in the housing environment. So I'm glad to be supporting this tonight. That's all.
Councilman McCormick? Okay, and I do have a couple questions, and I know that in one of the subdivisions, and have been longer than 7 years, that it was requested by the town to allow a detached garage that is in the neighborhood to become an ADU. And they may have been a little bit ahead of their time, but they were denied because at that point, they didn't meet the minimum requirements. And I don't know if the ADU had been in our code yet, but I fully suspect that, or fully expect that this one house, because it lends itself to having an ADU, will come back in the future to actually take advantage of this. But I have a couple questions, and it goes more with HOA rules. So the draft ordinance says no off-street parking is required for an ADU unless otherwise authorized by state law. And one of the things is in subdivisions, sometimes we have very limited parking. And if you do have an ADU, and we're going to make for an assumption that it's a couple moving in and they both have 2 vehicles, 1 vehicle each, so 2 vehicles. And it is a home there already that has several vehicles. How do we address that when parking in some subdivisions is at a premium, especially when they have HOAs?
So the code right now, as it's written, it does not address parking explicitly for accessory dwelling units, but the state not for an accessory dwelling unit. So in this ordinance, we've affirmatively stated that that we cannot require on-street parking, or excuse me, on-site parking for it. There is provision in the law that, oh, sure. There is provision in the law that you could, that if there is a parking under certain circumstances, if there's a parking problem, a serious parking problem, that you could ask for a traffic or parking study and go that far with it if there was one. But generally speaking, for most, in my experience at least, most of their accessory dwelling units typically don't generate more than a car.
And would that traffic study be required before issuance of the permits for ADU?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So for those that are sitting here, and we said accessory dwelling unit, it can be a detached or an attached, correct?
Or internally within the building itself.
Okay, so that brings up another HOA question. I know that one of the HOAs has it specifically said in the covenant that every house must have a 2-car garage.
Mhm.
And I point this out because this was challenged by the court several years ago, and when this person turned their 2-car garage into a workout room, and they eliminated the garage doors, and so there was no garage per the covenants. So if a garage is converted into an ADU, which is permissible by the state, and now if this passes by the town, how do you rectify that it goes against an HOA requirement, or can you regulate that?
The town cannot regulate HOA provisions. That becomes a civil matter between the property owner and their HOA.
So
We're only regulating what, in this case, we would, and it's specified in the ordinance that the ADU cannot eliminate required parking for the house itself.
Okay.
But the ADU unit itself does not require to have parking, just to be clear.
So one of the problems that the town has run into before when it comes with HOAs is that by code, the town issues a permit. It checks all the boxes, but that permit that was issued is not allowed in the subdivision by the HOA rules. And I have always been told, maybe I've been told wrong, that an HOA can be more restrictive than the town, but it cannot be more loose than the town or state. They can impose those. So my question to you is, how do the subdivisions and the HOA work with the town so that when the Smiths receive because they checked all the boxes, they received a permit for an ADU that they're going to convert their garage into an accessory dwelling unit. And by doing that, they intend and they submit the plans to you to remove a garage door where the HOA specifically says you must have a 2-car garage.
So I'll answer it this way is that, again, part of it becomes a civil matter between the HOA and the homeowners. But when we receive new subdivisions as part of our code, it does require that all CC&Rs for new developments be reviewed by the town for approval. And so at that time, these types of issues would be flagged to make sure that the HOA proposed requirements are in line with state law.
That's great to hear because I know we do have development on the horizon, but it still does not address what is on the books already and for those established subdivisions that have these active HOA covenants and rules.
Yeah, we would still issue the permit for it if it complied with our requirements in the zoning code. I have to issue the building permit for it. And then again, that the civil issue is outside of what the town's purview is to regulate.
And do you ever alert the HOAs when a permit is something of this will be issued? Because what happened in this case, again, I believe the individual legally obtained permits to do renovations on their home, but it went against the HOA. And so it ended up in court and the HOA it leaned towards the HOA saying that they were right in making the family reverse back to a garage, the appearance.
Yes, ma'am. So the short answer is no, we don't, because I have no way of being able to research all of the HOAs that are out there to know which HOAs this would apply to or not. One thing I could proffer tonight here is that we could require that an application for an accessory dwelling unit, if there is a homeowners association, obtain approval from the HOA before they submit.
And I believe that that our permits do state that already. Certain ones do, unless that has been changed. But back in the day, it did, especially when it comes to getting, doing structural things like adding a deck. It wouldn't even pass go back in the day. Now things change. Unless attached was approval letter from the HOA along with the covenants and the architectural rules. That's the way it was in the past. I don't know if it's changed because that's not under my umbrella.
To be honest with you, I don't remember seeing anything within the department's policies that has that. I've seen it happen in other communities where what you're talking about occurs. But again, unless it's codified in our code specifically, I can't really enforce an approval from anybody first.
That would be something that I would really entertain looking into, because when we're talking about that individual who's house changed, the appearance, the big crust of it. And there was one that also built an ADU without calling it an ADU. They called it a garage to house, an RV. They did not obtain approval from the HOA. And when questioned, the town said exactly what you just said. We can't deny
Mhm.
that because they checked all the boxes, but where it said HOA approval, it was skipped on those particular ones that I can speak of. I don't know how many other have gone there. And that was probably
Sure.
12, 15 years ago. So that may be something worth, it may have a headache pushed aside if they work in conjunction with active HOAs, because there's not many of them, but
Sure. And like I said, I mean, you can certainly add something to, as a requirement that in conjunction with an application, that any act or any HOA would have to require an approval for the accessory dwelling unit. The only problem is you have sometimes, and I don't know what the extent is in the PLATA, but you could have situations where you don't have an active HOA. And so what is somebody to do if they don't have an active HOA to be able to give them an approval? I find myself living in a community like that. There's plenty of houses around, but there's no active HOA. So it's there on the books technically, but it's not really, nobody enforces anything unless they wanted to go to court order, to get a court order to stop it.
I think that can be easily solved by saying an active HOA who is in good standing with the state. And that would definitely cover that avenue, because there are several subdivisions within the incorporated town limit that back in the day had an HOA, but it is no longer active and it's no longer in good standing with the state. So that is something that I would be very interested in hearing, just because I have personal experience of how that went against a homeowner and resident and cost them a lot of money.
Sure.
When that could have been avoided by just making sure that that box where it said HOA approval, that it was checked. It was long before you were here, so I just want to make that, state that.
Sure. No, it's points well taken.
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much. Any other questions from the dais?
Yes, please.
Councilman Johnson?
Mr. Dooley, I think going back to parking, I see in the ordinance, line 93, it says no additional off-street parking shall be required. I believe during the conversation, the question was asked, before a permit is issued, will a study be required? I don't see in the ordinance where a study will be required.
Because it's basically, the general intent is to not require off-street parking per state standards. If there's a unique situation where we did have a serious parking problem for the neighborhood and HOA, it gives the town at least the ability to ask for it, but it's not something that we would normally require. If the council wants to include that additional nuance to it, I mean, I think that's perfectly fine.
I'm just making sure I didn't miss it. I don't
No,
see it.
no,
Okay,
sir.
it's not in here.
No, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Follow-up question. So if you have a townhome or a duplex, not a single family home, that is requesting an internal ADU, is that permitted?
No, ma'am, it's just for single family detached dwelling units.
Okay, good. That's what I needed to hear for the record. Thank you. All right. Madam Clerk, have you received any additional written statements to be included in the record?
No, Madam Mayor, no written statements have been received.
All right, thank you. We will now proceed to public comment. I do have one resident that has signed up, and I'm going to try to say your name properly, so correct me if I'm wrong. I'll just go with Miss Love. Acoma, right? Miss Love, you have 3 minutes. If you would state your name for the record, state your name, whether you live within the incorporated town limits, and if you could Oh, sorry, that's okay. If you could state your name, whether you live within the incorporated town limits, and if you could just limit your comments to 3 minutes, that would be very much appreciated.
I sit next to him. Can I get as much time as he had?
You'd have to be part of staff to do that. So you have to work for us in order to do that.
1v1.
Okay, all right. And this, just so we're clear, whatever comment, this is a public hearing. So this is on the accessory dwelling unit.
Yes.
Okay, just want to
Okay.
make sure because we don't have public
All
hearings.
right. Good evening, everybody. God bless. I came for one thing and I found out about the ADU and that is relevant. So I signed up for both. Okay.
Could you state your name for the
oh,
record and whether you live in the incorporated
yeah.
town limits? Thank you.
Acoma Love. And yes, I am. I stay at the hotel right here, Deluxe Inn. And if anybody want to help me pay $70 a day, I'm very serious. Yes. They call me homeless. So I am within the incorporated town limits. I am particularly interested in this because I first heard about it through Rockville Zeta Faith Act. And I have taken that information to every church I ever went to, organization, community. Nobody ever got back to me on it. So I'm really glad to hear that this is the subject for one of the subjects for tonight. I want to know how the church lots, do they also fit in to this whole scheme of things, and how it applies to the homeless? Because, you can't keep paying the rates, and there's no, what do you call them? Hotel vouchers and things like that. So you're paying the same rate that everybody else is paying. And so that would help a whole lot. So there are tents, sheds that can be put on the lots, and even parking lots that are vacant, in the evening. And then truthfully, I think, and that's one of the things I'm going to be doing, is calling the churches to open their doors 24/7, because this church right across the street here, La Plata United Methodist Church, if you've ever been there, seen the size of that space. They did not have this year warm nights. I slept on a bench in below freezing temperatures. Those moon blankets, they do work. I want you to know. That was not my desire, but I did, test them out and it worked. But I think it would have been more humane to open the doors for people to come in, and there should be more volunteers in the community to make that happen. So I'd like to join with the crew and get some people we call homeless who have vision, and everybody does, so that we can work together. I did not hear about this until yesterday. And I said, not again. I don't want to come to these things because one is so nerve wracking trying to get 3 minutes in. God told me let people get sleep every night. So, I'll talk your head off. So 3 minutes is hard for me. So how can we work together and get an understanding, and also make sure that the Southern Maryland News is covering the chocolate side of the vanilla? I don't know what, ebony and ivory, that kind of thing, to make sure we have a balance with the demographics in every sense of the word: housing, business, and so forth. Because we're going to need that if people are going to still have to pay for the ADUs. So if we're talking about people we call homeless, there is a way, and I'll talk about that on the other side of the other thing.
Thank you
Okay.
very much.
And thank you. Okay, push the button.
That is signed up. All right. Does the town council have any other questions for Mr. Stevens or Director Dooley? All right, Mr. Stevens or Director Dooley, do you have anything further to add before we conclude this public hearing?
No, ma'am.
No, Mayor.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. So this concludes the public hearing on the proposed zoning text amendment accessory dwelling units, and the town council will hear no further comments or questions regarding this. As with every public hearing, we ask if it is the will of the council to keep this open so that people that may have just learned about it have an opportunity to weigh in. So Councilman Gutenberg, is your will to keep it open or close?
Close the record, please.
Okay, Councilman McCormick,
Close the record.
Councilman Sampson,
Close the record.
Councilman Johnson?
Close the record.
And I would like, my vote is I'm overruled here, but I would have liked to keep this open because I think there are a couple unresolved issues that we just spoke about with the HOA. And obviously we have some people that are paying attention that may not have learned about our public hearing. But seeing that the majority has ruled to close this public hearing is officially closed, and this public hearing at 6:29 PM. Thank you so much. All right, next on our agenda is our consent agenda. Council, if you've had a moment to, I'm going to do a statement. Since I see some new people that are joining us this evening, I would like to explain what a consent agenda is. Consent agenda is designed to approve projects in a single motion that, while they're very important, do not require council or staff discussion. So with that said, do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? If you are in favor, please indicate by saying aye. If not, nay. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Then the motion carries. Next is public comment. So this one is open to anything. If you would like to speak, I ask that you state your name, whether you live within the incorporated town limits, and if you could please limit your comments to 3 minutes. Ms. Love, you are up again.
Okay, she told me not to push it, and I did. That's why it didn't work. Just tap it. My name is Akoma Love. Yes, I live within the, okay. And he looks like that guy that plays on that comedy. It's 3 white guys. It's a comedy thing. You know what I'm talking about. I kept looking to see if he was that guy. And I love comedy. So, Akoma Love. They call me to make the people smile police. If you ever see me acting like grown-ups, please check and see what they put in my coffee. I don't want to grow up and be like grown-ups, okay? I started a smile campaign because I used to hang out at Dollar Tree before they banned me twice, okay? Because I was afraid I was making them smile, honest to God. Yes, you can go ask them. And these boards here, we have over 23 of these boards signed by every race under the sun, every age. We've had priests, we had pastors, and the things that people open up and talk about. You're sitting there, but I know that the devil don't like you no more than he like anybody else. And you have your moments and you have your moments. What you do behind closed doors, only God knows. This has given a lot of people a chance to open up and tell me personal things. So I stopped making jewelry and gave full time to listening to people, putting a smile on people's faces. And I've had every race under the sun, every age, tell me, thanks, I'm so glad you're doing this. Long story short, this space out here, they're asking me, where are you going to display the boards? I said, I don't know. I said, if I'm homeless, I don't even have a home, where are we going to do the boards? It would be awesome to do something right here with the homeless, recognizing, acknowledging not only myself, but many people that I know of are doing something. Now, nobody's perfect. We can attest to that. So we're not even going to go there. But even without imperfections, let's do something. Let's make something happen. I started a magazine as a result when they banned me to keep circulating the information. I've been banned from everywhere. Starbucks, the donut place over here. Matter of fact, they don't even want me on the lot at all. And of course, Dollar Tree twice, La Tolteca. I wasn't even near there, Planet Fitness. And the list just goes on and on. It's ridiculous. I reached out to Chamber of Commerce, a whole lot of people. No one has been willing to sit down and talk to me, not even the church. I've been trying to get a meeting with Pastor Susan for over almost a year. I think I've been very patient. I've sent out 1 billion emails, and I hope you all get them and read them. I'm also a poet, so, read everything as if I was reading it poetically. But we have to talk about it. We have to get together, and we have to help people make it through the day. with a simple smile. And that's it. So how do we get started doing something, whatever you want to call it, so that people can actually come out, share their testimony, record it. Y'all have Charles, what is it, Charles County now or something, mother? Oh, is that for me? Is that, oh, Jesus Christ. Okay. So I have a lot more of these boards. What can we do?
Thank you so much, Ms. Love. Appreciate that. Next, for public comment then on the sign-up sheet is Ms. Wang.
Oh, there we go. Hi, everyone, council members, Madam Mayor, and extended staff. My name is Shannon Wang. I do not live in the town limits. I have owned a business right here in La Plata for the last 10 years. I've been involved with either facilitating or have personally painted all of the murals in town, helped with the Pocket Park, the Purple Martin statue out front, designed the banners hanging on all the light poles in town, and more. I am standing before you tonight out of frustration. I'm not as prepared as I usually would be for standing up and talking. I wasn't actually going to show up tonight. But today at the gas station, a friend and local business owner stopped me and said, "Hey, you're super involved with the town. What the hell is happening with the council, and why are they arguing all the time?" My response was, sadly, I'm nowhere near as involved as I was, and I'm sure most of this council wouldn't even know me if I walked right past them. And he wasn't the first person to ask me around town. As a decade-long business owner in town, I'm struggling to understand the priorities here. We're watching weeks of public time being wasted arguing, spending countless hours making jabs and power grabs and just straight bickering, and it's a little embarrassing to watch. Meanwhile, our town is stalling. Aside from finalizing the previous council's tax hike for the police and launching LEOPS, I don't know what has actually been accomplished, but I do know what we've lost. The Beautification Commission is gone. Keep La Plata Beautiful Group has been entirely dismantled. Litter pickups have stopped happening. Community art projects have paused. And instead of dedicated volunteers, public art and beautification have been handed over to Public Works. My understanding is that Public Works is built for infrastructure, not for community aesthetics and creative town engagement. So this change just doesn't make sense to me. And while we argue over emails, the real issues facing La Plata are ignored, with the empty buildings around town with no movement or strategy to fill them, no incentives for local businesses to bring more people in or keep the ones that we have. I'm not a homeowner, but I do know that they are worried about all the new building and the traffic, et cetera. And just to make matters worse, communication is, I feel, poor, that many business owners, including myself and residents, don't even know who their specific council representative is, and feel disconnected from the people that were elected to serve us. And so my feeling is that we need more leadership and less bickering, and we need a strategy for our empty storefronts to support our local economy and a return to staying on top of making our town vibrant and exciting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Wang. Any other, anyone else wanting to speak this evening? All right, thank you very much. That brings us to matters of council discussion. Mr. Stevens, off-road
Okay.
vehicles.
All right, good evening, council. Chuck Stevens, town manager. This item for your consideration this evening, normally you wouldn't see this back to back like this. You had first reading of it for introduction at your last meeting on August 11th. As staff was preparing this ordinance, we saw that there were some formatting errors. And normally we would just correct those and not bring it back. But there was one substantive change, and you see a companion piece of legislation that goes along with this. It's actually your next item on the fee schedule. And so I thought it best to bring it back just so I can clearly state what the change is before you see this again on legislation for the second reading for adoption. So what this item is, this is the ordinance for the Public Nuisance Unregistered Off-Road Vehicle Enforcement and Accountability Code. As I already stated, on August 11th, Town Council, we held the first reading. And as we were preparing the legislation for this evening, we noticed those formatting corrections, and so those are detailed in your packet. But the fee collection is what we changed, and that's what I want to highlight for you. So as we met as staff to go over what changes needed to happen to the fee schedule, we noticed that there was a sentence in the ordinance that it just doesn't, it's not going to be the way we're actually going to collect it. And it has to do with the towing fee and the storage fee for any vehicles that might be towed or stored. Originally, it was drafted in such a manner that the town would collect that fee and pay the towing company or pay the storage company. And that's not our practice. And we don't want to do that. We don't want to be the middleman. And so the correction that's here before you tonight strikes that sentence entirely so that the towing company and the storage lot will bill the owner of that vehicle directly. The town will not be involved in it. So that's why you're seeing it back here for matter of discussion. Otherwise, the ordinance remains the same as what you discussed at your last meeting on August 11th and what was introduced for the first reading on August 11th. And if council desires, you'll see this for second reading for adoption this evening during legislation. I hope that was clear enough. If not, I can read through the whole report, but it really is just that one sentence that we modified.
All right, I will open the floor. Council Goodberg.
Yes. So to me, this particular ordinance is a good example of local government working well in the following way. This is a local safety problem primarily, but it's also a nuisance problem. And many of us in various parts of the town have experienced this, and in particular this year, we talked somewhat about the metrics about this early on when it came into being. But the reason why I think it's really good is that as a resident myself, obviously, and a council member, I was able to pull this together as an idea, as a concept, and bring it to council for consideration, where we talked about it. And we talked about the ways other communities, either municipalities or counties, have addressed this, and using examples of other places in Maryland, that other communities that have worked to really address this actively on the ground where they live. We were able to give those examples to town staff, the police chief, Mr. Stevens, and that was pulled together by staff into a version that is La Plata. It is not a copy paste. It's never that simple. And what staff was able to bring together and vet through the town's attorney is a workable solution that is right for La Plata. It's right in the size of the fines. It's right in the way that we're notice-based nuisance abatement. You know, it isn't heavy-handed, but it is firm and it's structured, and it I think is going to address a need where we have community policing practices in La Plata, and the police department. None of us wants to see the police department in high speed chases or trying to chase down young people on dirt bikes, essentially, or groups of young people doing that. And so that doesn't help anybody. And this gives us a way that we can address the nuisance aspect of it, but maybe more importantly, address the safety aspect of it, because not only is it dangerous for the young people that are taking part in that activity, but other road users who are not expecting to see a young person just flying down the road, whether you're a pedestrian or on a bicycle or whatever. So we want to avoid that. And I think that this is, a local code based on other local codes in Maryland that have been successful. And we're going to employ it here. And I think it has really good features that we've talked about previously. And I think this is just a good example of things that we're doing that are good for La Plata. So I'm looking forward to supporting this tonight. Thank you.
Councilman McCormick? Councilman Sampson? Councilman Johnson?
Nothing, thank you.
And I'm glad that we brought this up again because I have had time to really think and digest this. I had This weekend, I was approached by someone who lives on St. Mary's County. And he was very distraught because there were several adolescents that were on the street in the middle of St. Mary's County on e-bikes, which an e-bike is we all know bicycles are permitted on the roads, but they have to act like a vehicle. But they were in the middle of the road, and it was 11:30 on Friday, yeah, just a few days ago. He indicated that he contacted our local police and was told there's nothing that can be done. Again, this happened at 5:30 and there was nothing done. I am assuming, and it might be a wrong assumption, that these adolescents were the same ones that were here on Friday night at the concert, and they were very disruptive. But on my way home, you had 3 of them that decided to go over to our local dash-in, climb up on the gas pump and sit up there, and nothing's been done. So this ordinance is needed, but the way it is written, I still have a heartache with. So one of the things we discussed last week, and it was really drilled home, and I really thought about this, was 2 things: a reasonable person and intent. Those were words that were said more often than not in our meeting last week. And I'd like to apply this to the same thinking of this. I know that our attorney has reviewed this, but again, reasonable and intent. So what does reasonable mean? Being in accordance with reason, but this is what Webster Dictionary said, but possessing sound judgment. What does the word or mean? A choice between alternatives of the same nature. These definitions are objective. They're not political. They are not subject to creative reinterpretation. They are definitions a reasonable person is expected to apply. The same standard the majority of us heard last week. So let's consider the word or. So if we go out to dinner and we are given a choice after we have a delicious meal of a dessert of chocolate lava cake or carrot cake, a reasonable person understands both are desserts. They're different flavors, the same categories. But when you give a child a choice between a red balloon or a green balloon, they're both balloons, they're both a toy per se, different colors, but same item. And then when someone is asked whether they want a pen or a pencil, a reasonable person understands both are writing instruments, different forms, same function. In each example, the word or presents 2 alternatives that are similar in nature and equal in purpose. That's just how the English language works. That's how a reasonable person's standards works. And this is how the ordinance reads. So let me elaborate a little bit. The ordinance uses the phrase town law enforcement officer or town code enforcement officer 4 separate times. Line 109, authority to issue formal written notices. Line 164, authority to issue prior warning notices. Line 286, authority to impound unregistered off-road vehicles. Line 478, full enforcement authority for the entire ordinances. 4 instances for identical constructions and 4 grants of authority. Under the reasonable person standard, the repeated use of or in these enforcement sections convey that both positions are treated as equivalent enforcement officers. A reasonable person, and I will tell you, I gave this to 3 people and did not say yes or boo about anything and said, tell me what this said. And at the end, I asked the question, are they equal or not? A reasonable, all 3, I think, are reasonable people. They all said they're equal. So the conclusion becomes even more significant when considering the practical realities. We have an amazing, amazing code enforcement officer and team, but they do not carry protective gear. They do not receive law enforcement training. They do not carry defensive tools. They do not have arrest authority. They do not operate under use of force protocols. They do not possess the legal protections afforded to sworn officers. Yet, the ordinance assigns them enforcement duties identical to those of town law enforcement officers. I know, as I just mentioned, it was said that it was run by our town attorney. The attorney approval, however, does not change the plain meaning of English words. Attorney approval does not override the reasonable person standard the majority relied upon last week in our discussion. Attorney approval does not transform the word or into something other than an indicator of equivalent alternatives. And the attorney approval does not eliminate the fact that the ordinance as written grants equal enforcement authority to two fundamentally different positions. And attorney approval does not shift responsibility away from this legislative body that is set to adopt this ordinance as written. If the approved language unintentionally grants code enforcement officers full enforcement powers, then the drafting is flawed. If the approved language intentionally grants code enforcement officers full enforcement powers, then the policy choice is flawed. Either way, the issue remains. A reasonable person reading this ordinance would conclude that the town enforcement officer is granted the same enforcement authority as the town law enforcement officer. But there's a clear way to fix this mistake. The ordinance can be corrected by removing town code enforcement officer from the enforcement sections entirely, from the ordinance entirely. Or if the intent is for code enforcement officers to assist the police department rather than enforce, the word or can be replaced with in conjunction with, or in concerted effort with, or something similar to that. These phrases establish a supportive role rather than an enforcement role. Keeping the word or as it currently stands may not reflect the intended meaning clearly. At this time, clarification is requested regarding the intent behind granting enforcement powers to the town code enforcement officer and whether the will of the council wishes to correct the language accordingly. So I know our attorney is here, but Mr. Stevens, we discussed this on the 11th. I voiced my concerns. My concerns are still valid in my opinion, and I did a lot more digging on it. It's plain the way that is written, that a reasonable person would say or means either or. And if you're going to have a code enforcement officer doing the same duties as a police officer, then we have a problem.
Was there a question, Madam Mayor?
Is there a way that we can, if it's the will of the council, to update this? And my question would be for the attorney as well, that if it goes forward like this and we do have a claim, how is this defensible? If there's a claim against, if the code enforcement officer does what is granted, the powers granted in this ordinance, and we have a claim, whatever the claim is from the code enforcement officer, how is this defensible when this written to a reasonable person gives them both the same powers?
So while Mr. Pounds is walking up to the microphone, I'll answer the first part of your question. Absolutely. If the council gives direction this evening to change anything, anywhere in any of your legislation, we'll happily make the correction.
Again, I want to state for the record, I am not against this ordinance. I am against that two-letter word or. But my question, Mr. Pounds, was how is this defensible?
Well, there's many parts to that question, Madam Mayor. Todd Pounds, town attorney. But what's important is, the various, aspect of what you just said. And if you would like to make the motion to the amendment of the ordinance, you're certainly more than entitled to do that. It's part of your job as the council to do that. But you're correct in that the term or, with regard as it applies to this ordinance only, then they are in essence equal in enforcing this ordinance. Okay, that's the way it is currently written, no doubt about it. Now, there's all, again, you've brought up a number of different quote unquote hypotheticals that indeed possible claims that people could make. Are you, those claims, I'm assuming that the code enforcement officer would in some way create some type of liability on the town or assault these other people in doing that, or that these people would assault the code enforcement officer in them doing that? Or is it just simply nothing more than them issuing a municipal violation, which I think is the intent of what is going on here? I would not expect the code enforcement officer to try to arrest anybody, to try to do anything that would be against the law. All he would be doing is enforcing this ordinance to, in essence, issue a citation, or in essence, perform whatever duties would be necessary to impound the vehicles per the statute, per the ordinance.
Thank you for that. And you brought up a very valid point. You would not expect them to, but you also said, as if I heard you correctly, or right there gives both of them equal footing. It says town law enforcement officer or town code enforcement officers. There's not a distinction that one has more power than the other. They are equal. It doesn't say they're working in conjunction with each other, but this ordinance, as it stands alone and is brought to court, what would a reasonable judge look at with the word or?
Okay, well, again, a few things right there. With regard to or, you're correct, as it applies to this ordinance only, that the power would be given to either law enforcement or code enforcement as it applies to this ordinance. That's the way it is written. Now, I've learned long time ago not to, pretend to put on a robe on myself. But as far as, what a court would generally do is to make the determination as to if it is reasonable as to the interpretation. The actual drafting is up to the legislative body. The courts interpret. The legislative body is the ones who actually draft. So they would make the determination whether it would be ambiguous, whether it could be understood by the public. That would be the court's function. But as far as the drafting itself, they would leave that to you.
So, Councilman Gutenberg, since you drafted this, or you brought this forward and you had a hand in doing that, would you be opposed to either eliminating town code enforcement officer, which I'm not really a proponent of, or changing the word or to indicate that the two work together in conjunction with, in concerted effort with, whatever the language is to indicate that they are not of equal statute. They are working together.
And if I may make a comment before you do that, the problem with in conjunction with indicates that they must work together.
Okay.
So in essence, if you had code enforcement, they must have law enforcement together. So just want to make sure that that's the way I would read that.
Yeah.
So what would the word that you would use to indicate that they are working
If that be,
together? They support each other.
I think if you wanted to, you could just take the code enforcement out of it, and then in essence, make it just the law enforcement that would be issuing the municipal citation. That would make it clear. And then the code enforcement could in essence inform as it apply, and that would only apply to this ordinance, not any other code enforcement ordinances, only this ordinance, that in essence, the citation would only apply to law enforcement to issue the citation.
Okay. So, Councilman Gutenberg.
Yes, so there was a whole lot of stuff there. So first, just to clear up a couple of things. I did not draft the legislation, nor is it practice that members of the council draft legislation. So that is a concept that's more akin to the analogy of congressional bills. Okay, so here in municipal government, members of council, when things come on the agenda that are initiated by a member of council, generally what our practice has been is to bring a concept and a framework for something that we then discuss. And then if we all agree, then that concept or that framework is given to staff and we agree on a priority, and then staff pulls together the actual legislation.
Correct.
So that is what has happened here. And so now and if I forget any parts of these questions, bring me back to it. But so we did discuss this particular issue at length 2 weeks ago. And at that time, I was satisfied from the discussion from Mr. Stevens and from our chief of police that they did not share the concern or the same way it's being presented here as being a thing that they were worried about. And so is there in my memory of the concept and the things that were brought together in the original proposal that I brought as a councilman's staff report a council report on the agenda item did not specifically feature the police and code enforcement. And so I think I'll ask you, Mr. Stevens, do you remember in the laying out of the details here, if there were examples in other municipalities or counties that this was drawn from, or was there a specific thing that is what is the genesis of it, I guess, is what I'm getting at.
I'll harken back to a comment you made earlier, Councilor Gutenberg, about how we looked at other legislation that exists throughout the state, but we tailored this for the town. And so that language was specifically crafted by me. So I'm the author of the document, and I did include code enforcement on purpose. And the reason why is when you look at how the town does law enforcement and code enforcement, we're a very small staff, we're a small police department, and we work together as a team on many, many topics. What I envisioned, how we plan to enforce this ordinance, was that we don't want a high-speed pursuit. Okay, we may identify an activity, but in all likelihood, we're probably going to be approaching a residence or an address after the fact and approaching an owner. There's specific language in there talking about the owner of the off-road vehicle. And so with that as the framework in my mind, okay, does that need to be law enforcement or could that be code enforcement? And again, because we're not a very deep bench, patrol usually has things going on. I just thought that it would be beneficial to the town to allow code enforcement to knock on that door. That is something that they do. And they also know how to disengage. So it's true that they don't have police powers, and we never want to presume that. But that's where that language came from.
Understood.
And happy to strike it.
Yeah, well, so this is what I'm remembering from the conversation 2 weeks ago is in this dynamic, it is not a reasonable assumption that a code enforcement person is assumed to have police powers. They clearly do not. The chief told us this. And so when I read through this and look at the way this is constructed, what I imagine is very much what you said. When we have evidence that a dirt bike has been driven through the town, and then somebody's says, "Hey, this pulled in at this garage. That's where they're from." Well, now we know this is not a criminal investigation; it's a civic infraction, which is a feature of this that makes it that they automatically, I think, de-escalates it. And effectively, what is being issued, I believe, Mr. Pounds, is that it is just a notice that is given to the homeowner, the parent, the guardian of the place where the vehicle is stored, if it is a minor. And it is just dropping off that notice, which is a feature of this, which allows the rest of it to come into place. If that vehicle is driven, that unregistered off-road vehicle is driven on public roads again, then it triggers the enforcement pieces that the police department would do.
That is correct. It is more than a notice. It is a civil violation.
Yeah. And
Civil
so,
fine.
okay. Yeah. And so based on that understanding, the level of conversation that we had 2 weeks ago, and, I think that all of those things put together, I remain okay with the language as it is. And I think, if there's specific concerns that the town manager wants to respond to in that, I mean, he could clearly in operational policy make sure that it, without addressing the ordinance, could address the operational policy of how code enforcement works the same way our police department has very clearly documented general orders on how they handle every situation. And that would allow us not to have to do anything to the ordinance as is. And the town manager and the police department, who both talked to us about this 2 weeks ago, can effectively use this the way it was designed and intended.
That could be established.
Okay.
And just a brief follow-up, Mr. Goodman, if I could. I think this, I just want to make sure council knew, this is the classic example of why there are two readings for any ordinance, is for, the council to think about it, make any changes, find something that, could have been written better. And so this is a classic example of why it's done that way. So thank you.
Yeah, understood. Yeah, and I think the conversation is good. I think, it helps establish the intent behind things, and if we have to adjust, we can.
Other comments before I respond to Councilman Gutenberg? Councilman Gutenberg, you did say that you just mentioned a reasonable person would, we talked about this, would see that code enforcement is not given the same duties, but we just had our town attorney who works for us, for the best for the town, just say that, or in this document only, gives them, it could be interpreted equal powers. If we eliminate town code enforcement officer, it does say in this ordinance that the town manager has authority to approve. So the town manager could always give direction to code enforcement, but it doesn't have to be codified in an ordinance where it gives them equal footing of law enforcement officers without affording them the tools needed that for protection.
Sure.
If we're giving equal, the town manager has the right to always assign duties other than, but it should not be codified in here unless there's a different word other than or. It's, if we approve this as is, it goes against what our town attorney, whom the 5 of us hired to work in the best interest of the town, it goes against his
Well, I think
advice.
I didn't hear it as black and white as you're saying back. And I mean, I just listened to him, right? There's ways this can be navigated, but I'll say this. I think that in both examples you gave, in theory, the town could be sued by somebody who's not happy with their interaction with code enforcement, because if we remove this, what you said to me was, if we remove this from code, the town manager is still free to direct people operationally, a code enforcement officer, to go do this anyway. And the town would therefore be exposed. So in both scenarios, I think we rely not on the ordinance and the placement of the word or, but we rely on the good judgment of the town manager, his operational policies with code enforcement, and the way the police department interacts with all of this.
Thank you for that. Mr. Pounds, for the record again, the words that are written in this ordinance, that's all we're talking about. We're not talking intent. We're talking defensible. The words that are written 4 times in here, town law enforcement officer or town code enforcement officer, and the powers that are given to both of them. Are they, as written, on equal footing?
Or as it applies to this ordinance only, correct.
Yes. Okay.
Okay, but at the same time, everything that's been discussed about how, even regardless of how it is written, instructions by Mr. Stevens, how it would actually be adopted and implied would also be very true also.
Intent is one thing, but to a person, this is going to be codified. You're not going to be here in 20 years, I would assume, that you're going to be retired and enjoying life. We're not, most of us will not be here serving as elected officials in 20 years. And I assume that Mr. Stevens will not be here either. So a person who picks up this document and reads it at face value, not knowing the intent of what sits here today, would they assume, would they have a reason to believe that they are on equal footing.
When you say there's a reason to believe and assuming
I
about a
don't
reasonable,
assume, take assume back. Would they look at this document and read it as equal footing?
I can tell you what they would do is they would realize that if indeed somebody was issuing a violation, and this is not a specific intent type violation, this is a general intent violation, in that they see someone riding a motorcycle down the street and they know where it goes to, then the code enforcement officer could go to that house, knock on the door and say, I saw that motorcycle driving down the street and here's a citation.
Totally understand that. I'm looking at the words.
Well, then they would know that either the police officer or code enforcement could issue that civil citation.
Well, I heard you say several times
And then,
that the ordinance gives the same powers to the code enforcement officer in this ordinance only as the police.
that's exactly what I said.
That-
Yeah.
Councilman Johnson?
Thank you. I believe, well, would you consider this ordinance a municipal infraction?
It would be a municipal infraction, correct?
The code, chapter 121, under enforcement, any ordinance essentially in that code can be enforced by a police officer or an individual designated by the chief of police, any code enforcement officer in the town, the chief executive officer or his designee. So by virtue, the code enforcement officer can issue any citations in town for various things, such as residents who don't take care of their lawn, such as sidewalk infractions. I believe drinking in public is a nuisance in the town of La Plata. I believe code enforcement can issue civil citations. It's also a state civil citation too, right? Like it's still gonna be a civil citation. I believe noise ordinance, code enforcement can issue citations. So I think the general practice is code enforcement officers exist for a reason in municipal government, particularly in La Plata, and they have the ability to enforce the ordinance as set forth by council from time to time, correct?
They do.
All right, thank you.
Councilman Johnson, you just made a very valid point, and this could solve all of this. Take out town code enforcement and put in or designee by the chief of police or by the town manager. And it does not pigeonhole a town code enforcement officer or give them the same powers. If you put a designee in there, then this solves all of this because it's already inherent in there. But to specifically mention a officer with an or that that is harder to defend than or designate. I am fine with or designate by.
I would have a problem with that. Okay, and I can tell you why, because designee might be Mr. Gutenberg. Okay, he should not have that authority to issue, or maybe Mr. Stevens. Well, he's, he runs the town, but it might be me. What happens if they decide that I'm the designee and I have the authority to do that? That would be completely inappropriate for anybody to be indicated as the designee. If it's going to be another individual other than law enforcement, that individual needs to be identified.
I think that the wordsmithing could indicate, which we do in most of our ordinances, when we give Mr. Stevens power to do whatever he's legally allowed to do. In some instances, it says or his designee, because it could mean that he's absent and he may have our assistant town manager there.
Yeah.
But to put code enforcement officer there in equal to town law enforcement, when you could take it out and have our town manager or chief of police on do a designee, that's fine. But codifying it with the code enforcement officer, I think is problematic.
I just want to follow up because I was mentioned. I understand your conversation. I just don't agree with removing the language. That's where I stand.
Okay. And that's why it's under discussion. Councilman McCormick.
So just some clarification from that conversation between yourself, Councilman Johnson, and Mr. Pounds real quick. So Mayor James, you're open with the language that Mr. Stevens can assign a designee. If that individual ends up being the town code enforcement manager, what would be your issue now?
He can assign, since he's operational,
Mhm.
and this is operational, he could assign whoever he wants. We won't know that unless he reveals that to us, because we have hired Mr. Stevens, knowing that he is quite capable of operations and running that.
I agree. So Councilman Gutenberg brought up a good point earlier with the history of how this ordinance came to fruition. And that was Councilman Gutenberg presented an idea to this council. This council liked the idea and gave instruction to Mr. Stevens. And Mr. Stevens has already told us who his designee is in this language. It's the town code enforcement officer. Again, there was a public statement earlier that asked, why is this council always infighting and discussing amongst each other? This is why. This has already moved forward. Mr. Stevens has addressed your questions. Mr. Pounds has addressed your questions. 2 council members have now stated on the record that they're okay with the language. My question is, what is the concern now that they've all been addressed? It sounds like every question that you have asked today, when it comes to this language of or, has been directly addressed.
And Mr. Pounds did say, as the document reads, that they're on equal footing.
Correct. But my question is, what is the concern with them being on equal footing when it comes to this ordinance specifically? They're not getting a gun and badge. What is the concern with this ordinance specifically that you're bringing up? You're saying it's written 4 times, and the language or in this ordinance gives the town code enforcement officer the ability to fill out the municipal citation and give it to the individual. What is your concern with that?
I have stated it several times, and if you weren't listening, I'm sorry. I'm not going to go.
You just said earlier that you're okay with Mr. Stevens giving a designee, and his language here tells us who the designee is. So again, I think I'm okay with this language, but if we're going to talk about the meta debate real quick, this is why folks are getting frustrated.
Thank you very much for your personal opinion on that. This is under discussion, and we are all afforded the opportunity to have a discussion on something that we're brought forward. And if you don't like that, I'm sorry about that. That is not, this is not personal. It is purely putting it on the record again that, and with Mr. Stevens, with Mr. Pound's acknowledgement that the or means that they're on equal footing. I have a problem with that, but it's been discussed, and unless there's anything further there, we can move on. All right, thank you very much. Next on the agenda is Town of La Plata fiscal year 27 fee schedule amendment.
All right, Town Council, Chuck Stevens, your town manager again. This is the companion ordinance that I spoke about just a few minutes ago. So the town's fiscal year 2027 fee schedule, originally adopted under ordinance 26-07, requires updates to ensure consistency with the recently adopted ordinance 26-17, that's a misstatement. It hasn't been adopted yet. First reading, second reading will go tonight. But if you adopt ordinance 2617, which establishes the off-road vehicle enforcement protocols, ordinance 2617 creates an administrative nuisance release fee and provides for towing and daily storage charges. I talked about the towing and storage charges already, and we've stricken that line. So we need to update the fee schedule to acknowledge the administrative nuisance release fee. So that's one change. And then additionally, since we're having to amend the fee schedule, we also want to bring it into alignment with Invoice Cloud. As you know, we just deployed Invoice Cloud in July of this year. And so currently the description of the credit card, debit card, PayPal, Apple Pay, and Google Pay transaction convenience fees requires additional clarification to align the terminology in our fee schedule with the town's Invoice Cloud agreement. So the updated description will read credit/debit card, PayPal, Apple Pay, and Google Pay transaction services and or convenience fees. So we're modifying that to be in alignment with our Invoice Cloud. So that's the ordinance that you'll consider this evening, the fiscal impact. The addition of the administrative nuisance fee of $50 as established by ordinance 26-17 will have minimal fiscal impact as it only applies to specific nuisance-related releases of off-road vehicles. Towing and daily storage charges will be paid directly to the storage towing provider, not the town. And the terminology update for the electronic payment fees has no fiscal impact. The strategic plan alignment, sustainability, ADA considerations are in your packet. And the recommended action for you this evening on this item is to adopt ordinance 26-21, the amendment to the fee schedule 2027 fee schedule, amending the FY27 fee schedule. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right. Any questions on this?
Just a quick note on the fee itself. I think I'm in favor of it being set where it is. I think in looking at what other municipalities are doing in other counties, they tend to use much more heavy fees. And I think though that it's okay that we're taking the start low approach, but it's something, you know, if through enforcement, the experience that we have with this is that we find that folks are able to easily get vehicles back out on the street and then continue infractions. Maybe the fee structure is something we look at down the road.
Can I clarify?
Sure.
Quickly if I can? So this is a fee. And we, the town, the government needs to be able to tie that back to an expense we incur. It's not a fine. So
This isn't the fine. Understood.
So the fee, I consulted with the police chief and we tried to estimate how many hours it will take staff to work this. So based
Understood.
on an average hourly rate, we're estimating $50 is going to be justifiable and defensible if we're challenged about the fee.
I understand now. Thank you. Yeah, appreciate that. That's all.
Any other comments? All right, I'm looking at consensus to move this forward to a legislation. Councilman Guber,
Yes, please.
Councilman McCormick,
Yes.
Councilman Sampson,
Yes.
Councilman Johnson,
Yes.
and I am a yes as well. Town hall use policy.
All right. Good evening, Town Council. So the town's code of ordinances does not currently address the use of town hall by private individuals, businesses, or outside organizations. The town's only established facility rental program applies to Wills Park and Tillman Lake Pavilion. There's no comparable policy, fee schedule, or approval process for the town hall itself. This gap was recently highlighted when a member of town council inquired about using town hall for an event. In reviewing the request, staff determined that neither the town charter nor the code of ordinances speaks to private or third-party use of the building, leaving such requests to be decided without a documented, consistently applied standard. Town hall has previously been used by other government agencies for their own official business in the past, such as the Maryland State Highway Administration, but that practice is distinct from private or third-party use and does not by itself establish a standard. To close this gap, staff has prepared for your consideration this evening the attached town hall use policy. The policy establishes town hall as reserved for official town business and government-to-government coordination, and it sets out defined criteria under which council-sponsored constituent events may also be held in the building. The policy directs residents and organizations seeking space for community events to the town's established rental venues, including Wills Park, Tillman Lake Pavilion, and the Police Department Community Room. This approach also reflects a legal consideration specific to town hall. Courts have recognized that once a government building is open to private groups for expressive or advocacy-related use, the government generally cannot then pick and choose among other groups seeking access based on the subject or viewpoint of their event, a concept sometimes called a limited public forum. A building can remain closed to private use or be opened under clear and consistently approved rules, but it cannot be opened selectively without inviting a strong argument that it must then be made available to any group on equal terms. Reserving town hall for official business while directing private and third-party requests to the town's existing rental venues avoids creating that exposure. And I did discuss this with the town attorney before we drafted this policy. And council, you'll know we've talked about limited public use before. That's how we were able to set the limits of 3 minutes and things like that. So we really don't want to blur those lines when it comes to council chambers where we conduct town business. And that's what this policy is all about. Fiscal impact. This policy does not create a new revenue source or expense, and town hall has not historically operated under a rental program. To the extent that reserving town hall for official use forecloses any nominal rental revenue the building might otherwise generate, that amount would be minimal and is not material fiscal consideration when weighed against the legal and operational exposure of opening town hall to private use. No budget appropriation or long-term exposure is associated with adoption of this policy. The strategic plan alignment as well as your sustainability and ADA considerations are in your packet. The recommended action for you this evening, council, is to adopt Resolution 26-56, a town hall use policy establishing town hall as reserved for official town business and defining the limited circumstances under which the building may otherwise be used. And happy to answer any questions.
Council, any questions? Councilman Sampson?
Yes, I'd like to say I appreciate town staff taking the lead on this. And just so it's clear, when the town manager was talking, I was the councilman that requested because and this goes back to what one of the constituents just said here not too long ago. I wanted to use the facility as a co-sponsor with an entity to educate the public that Charles County had just passed, Prince George's County just recently as having the highest eviction rate in the state. All right, not eviction, my fault, or foreclosure. Let me correct that. Foreclosure rate. And so one of the things I've been very concerned about is civic wellness in the sense of homelessness, helping the poor, the elderly, those type of things. And so that was the genesis of this. And so I want to say that I do thank the staff for putting this together. I support it. It doesn't fit exactly what I needed, but I do think it's something that was needed, and it clarifies the rules, and it's in the public good. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I want to thank the staff.
Yeah, I'll just say,
Good.
yes, thank you. I just found this to be very well supported as far as the way you laid this out to us. Understand the issue, and I think it's just a really sound policy, and I support this. Thank you.
All right, any further questions? All right, I'm looking for a consensus to move this forward. Councilman Gutenberg,
Yes.
Councilman McCormick,
Yes.
Councilman Sampson,
Yes.
Councilman Johnson,
Yes.
and I'm a yes as well. Brings us to 6.4. Mr.
Right.
Stevens?
Good evening, Town Council. On June 9th, 2026, the Town Council discussed potential updates to the town's governance documents concerning the powers and duties of the mayor. Following that discussion, the council directed staff to prepare 3 companion legislative actions. Number 1, a charter amendment resolution removing the language in Article 4, Section 3, letter F of the charter that designates the mayor as president of the council, with a public hearing scheduled no later than September 8th, 2026. Number 2, updated language in the council's rules of procedure establishing the process for appointing a council chair to take effect on the 50th day following posting of the charter amendment resolution. And number 3, an ordinance repealing and replacing Section 13-4 of the town code, presiding officer, to replace references to the mayor with the council chair or similarly appropriate language. Staff has prepared 4 documents in response to that direction. Charter Amendment Resolution 26-50, Ordinance 26-19, amending Chapter 13 of the Town Code, Resolution 26-53, adopting revised rules of procedure establishing the council chair, and Resolution 26-54, establishing a one-time process for the initial election of the council chair. Because these documents are interdependent and collectively implement a single governance change, staff is presenting them together as a single agenda item so that council may review the full package in context, even though each document will be acted upon individually under its own legislative process. The proposed methodology and timeline are as follows. This evening, all 4 governance documents are presented to Town Council for your review. The first reading of Ordinance 26-19 will be the only formal legislative action taken at this meeting. On September 8th, 2026, all 4 documents will again be presented to the Town Council under matters of discussion. At that meeting, the council will hold the required public hearing on Charter Amendment Resolution 26-50, and the council may take up for consideration of adoption Resolution 26-50, Resolution 26-53, Resolution 26-54, and the second reading of Ordinance 26-19. To ensure that governance change takes effect uniformly and without a gap or overlap between the outgoing and incoming presiding officer structures, All four documents carry a synchronized effective date of October 28th, 2026. This date satisfies the 50-day posting requirement applicable to the charter amendment and aligns each companion action to a single point at which the new structure takes effect. State law affords registered voters of the town a referendum opportunity following adoption of the charter amendment resolution. Immediately following adoption, the town must post an exact copy of the resolution at the main municipal building for 40 consecutive days. Concurrently, a fair summary of the resolution must be published in a local newspaper 4 times at weekly intervals within those 40 days. If no petition for a referendum is filed by the public, the amendment automatically goes into effect on the 50th day after it was adopted. If a qualified petition is received, all related legislative actions will be held in abeyance, and staff will bring the matter back to the town council for consideration of holding all previous legislative actions in abeyance at the October 27th, 2026 town council meeting. I've highlighted some key dates in the timeline for you. So September 8th, obviously tonight, you're seeing everything in context, all of the documents. Tonight, you will only consider, if you move it to legislation, you will only consider the first reading of the ordinance to change Chapter 13 for introduction only. Then on September 8th, the public hearing and adoption of Resolution 26-50, the Charter Amendment, would take place, along with the other resolutions that I spoke about a moment ago. October 18th would be the end of the 40 days, the referendum period. That would be the end of the posting publication period. A qualified petition must be delivered to town staff no later than the 18th of October. October 28th, if a qualified petition has not been received by the town, the charter amendment would automatically go into effect. November 10th, that is your next regularly scheduled meeting after October 28th, when all of the synchronized changes would take effect. The next scheduled meeting you have would be November 10th. Town council would then elect a presiding officer. November 24th, again, that's the next scheduled town council meeting according to your annual calendar for this year. November 24th, the newly elected presiding officer would then assume the position at that meeting. The fiscal impact. These actions are administrative and governance related in nature. No budget appropriation, new expenditure, or new revenue source is associated with this legislative package. No grant funding is involved. The strategic plan alignment, sustainability, and ADA considerations are in your packet. The recommended action for you this evening. Staff recommends that the town council take the following companion actions on the dates indicated, each with a synchronized effective date of October 28th, 2026. So beginning with this evening, introduce ordinance 26-19. That would be the first reading for consideration only with an effective date of October 28th. Adopt ordinance 26-19, second reading for consideration of adoption at your September 8th meeting with an effective date of October 28th. Adopt resolution 26-50. That's the charter amendment. That would be for consideration of adoption on September 8th with an effective date of October 28th. Adopt resolution 26-53, rules of procedure. That would be for consideration of adoption on your September 8th meeting with an effective date of October 28th. And finally, adopt resolution 26-54, election of a presiding officer. That would be for consideration of adoption at your September 8th meeting with an effective date of October 28th, 2026. And that concludes my report. I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
I'll open the floor to council. Councilman Gutler.
Thank you for preparing this. This is something obviously we've talked about a number of times. Back in, I think, April, we had long discussions about some aspects of this. You know, I'm sure that some of the conversation later may get a little contentious over various parts of it. But when I look at this, you know, the modifications that are being recommended here are not uncommon in municipal reforms to how governance inside the body works. The state constitution, Article 11, has clearly defined that this is a appropriate and there's procedures for how it's done. Staff has taken great pains to lay this out in a very thoughtful way so that it complies with all elements of the Maryland State Constitution. And I think that, we'll probably get into more discussion here in a minute over, certain aspects of this, but I think this is really well prepared, and the way all of these pieces are laid out and the way staff has taken time to lay this out in such a thoughtful way makes this much easier to consider. There's some complexity to how this goes over time. So for that, I'll say thank you. And, I support what's in here. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I think it's important to explain my thought process going into any ordinance, any resolution, any piece of legislation or vote or idea that's ever presented before me here on the dais. That is really, I ask myself two questions. Can we do this? First, is it legal? And then second, should we? Does it benefit the town? So with that in mind, I actually asked Mr. Pounds a question. Well, I asked Mr. Stevens a question, who forwarded to Mr. Pounds, who then sent and distributed this to the entirety of the council. And this question occurred at some point yesterday. And it was essentially to the point of, back in that April, May discussion, there was a confusion between, is this a power that rests with the council? Is this something this council can do, right, as written here and presented by staff today? Or is it something we cannot do? And there was a lot of debate back and forth. There was a contentious discussion about what we have found in the legal opinion of our town attorney here with how this legislation is being presented and how this agenda item has been presented is an unequivocal yes. This is a power that the council can do. And with that, the first question has been satisfied. And again, that opinion has been given to everybody here on the council. The second question is, should we do this? And this is where I think the debate really has to occur. And again, Councilman Gutenberg brings up a great point. This is things that other municipalities, other counties, other state governments do all the time. What we are discussing here is not the removal of duties or powers or diminishing the role of the mayor, which is something that has unfortunately been distributed to the public. It is, who is going to be the first person to rule on matters of discussion here? Who's going to be the presiding officer in effect? And again, I think it's important to understand that when you have a council of 5, who better to decide who's going to be the first person to rule on those points of orders and motions and help set the agenda than the 5 folks here. So again, I think this is a relatively simple question before us. Don't get muddied down by some of the opinions that might be out there in the public. The 2 questions before us today are, can we do this? Unequivocally, yes, from a town attorney. This is a legally sufficient document, and the way that this agenda was presented, I want to say thank you to the staff for presenting it this way. And then the second question is, should we do this? 100%.
Yes, good evening, Mr. Stevens. Thank you for the staff report. It was very well written and easy to read. Just 3 questions for you. First, I trust that it was done just to verify that staff has met or in the process of meeting the legal public notice requirement for the public hearing on September 8th.
That's correct.
Okay. Second, who runs town operations and government today? Day-to-day
Town,
operations.
town manager is responsible for day-to-day operations in the town.
Do you foresee anything that was written, that was proposed for staff to come back and draft that will hinder your ability to carry out the duties and operating the government day to day?
I don't see anything that's presented here this evening that will impact day-to-day operations, picking up trash, recycling, law enforcement, things of that nature.
Yeah, perfect. That's the gist of my question. Thank you.
Mr. Stevens, for transparency purposes, could you explain to our residents how the charter amendment came about and the process that led to this ordinance a little bit more being drafted and submitted, including who initiated the request, how the language was developed, what staff involvement occurred, and who approved the language? So the first one is just, how did this come about? So those that are sitting here or watching.
Okay.
Understand.
So this council had a series of meetings throughout the spring. There was one particularly long meeting in April. I think we spent a total of 6 hours in chambers that day. There was a lot of conversation about the charter, the code, desired changes and rules of procedure, a code of civility, which has subsequently been adopted, and a harassment policy, et cetera. So there were a number of changes that were discussed and considered And staff was given direction to draft and bring back to council to do, and we've been doing that. Then on June 9th, I think, yeah, June 9th, there was a town council meeting. This topic was raised by Counselor Johnson. He then read a motion, which he then provided to me after he read it so that I would have the exact language, which I've kept and I've used to guide me in drafting of all of this, because the motion that he read was subsequently endorsed by the council. So that was clear direction to me that we needed to take action on it. So I have that. So based on the June 9th conversation, which was building on the April conversations, and then the clear direction from council, I set forth trying to accomplish what was contained in the motion.
Okay, and so who developed the language? Did you develop the language, the proposed changes? Did staff do it? Was there any input from council members? Was it vetted by the attorney?
So I've drafted everything that you're considering this evening. So I'm the author of everything. I do use Grammarly if you want to, the AI assist, I have Grammarly, which will, correct grammar and do some sentence suggestions. When the documents were written, and again, it wasn't, the motion in and of itself doesn't lead one to think that there's going to be 4 companion documents. It was only when I got into it and realized that this touches multiple places and I'm going to have to change things. I got into it. I got everything drafted. First, what I did was like I always do, I staffed it internally with the assistant town manager and the legislative director, because they each bring a different lens and perspective to it. And we had some internal discussions, maybe a little bit of the back and forth and red lines. Once I was done internally, then I took all of those documents and I sent them to the town attorney in June. The town attorney reviewed them. I don't recall if the town attorney had any red lines or changes, but if he did, we would have incorporated them. That was in June. That took a little while to get done. We didn't have them. We only had one meeting in July. It was July 28th, I think. And so just looking at the calendar, looking what was in the motion, which gave a date certain to have this before you, I realized that I couldn't bring all of this to you on September 8th because the ordinance requires 2 readings. And if the intent of council was to have it done on the 8th, I had to back that up. So basically I did back planning from what I was directed to do by council, and just looked at the calendar of available meetings and plugged it in. And that's how we ended up here tonight.
Okay, so the first time that I saw this was when all of the documents, the way it was written, was when it was uploaded for public agenda. Did any of the council members see this language before or sit down and wordsmith or any of that?
No.
Okay, so thank you for that. Councilman Johnson, as the one that introduced the ordinance, I'd like to ask a few questions for you, if you're willing to answer, so that we can see the reasoning behind the proposed charter amendment changes. Are you fine?
It's your discussion time.
Okay. So the town of La Plata's framework establishing the powers and duties of the mayor and council have been in place since 1962, more than 64 years. It has worked for previous 15 councils and 7 mayors without issue. So what makes you, Councilman Johnson, the first in La Plata's history that believes these long-standing duties need to be changed?
Have you done research to say that it worked without issue, or they just don't bring up the concerns?
I'm sorry, I didn't.
You made a comment that there has been standing without issues. I'm assuming that you've done your research to notify that there was no concerns with the presiding officer.
Let me
Before I
say
answer.
that- Okay, good point for clarification that it has never been changed in 64 years.
Yeah, sure. Other various topics of the charter has been changed, such as this year, we made the charter amendment that we shall have a town manager. I don't know how long it said, May. I didn't do my history on how long it's been there. We did a charter amendment, I think in 2021, don't quote me, within the last decade, with language to purchase property or acquisition of property in town. But as I stated back when this agenda item something came up, we need a presiding officer that is responsible to the council, such as the comments I made where you don't hear motions, you ignore them. I still got this floor time. The rules are very clear. When a motion is made, it must be before question before council. Various point of orders. Point of orders are not planned, right? They happen in the moment. You point of orders, which is not a general practice in rules of governing when a member make a point of order. The presiding officer shall ask, what's your point? The member state their point. The presiding officer rule on the point, either in favor or not in favor. And then the member that made the point had the option to seek council appeal on should the presiding officer, what do you want to call it, ruled in the unfavor of the member. There was a comment back when I introduced the resign to run language. We got a notification that it was not going to be on the agenda. I believe we stated you had a legal question and it was recommended that it come off the agenda. We know the town manager ultimately made that decision for the agenda at that time. But on council, you said, yes, I derailed it at that meeting when you said I derailed it. So it's just been a constant behavior for my term. I didn't govern the last 64 years. I've been governing as a member of council since May of last year. And based on my observation and my responsibility to be a prudent council member in town on this legislative body, I believe, and I'll state again, that we need a presiding officer who is responsible to the council for various reasons.
Thank you for that. 3 more questions. And just a point of clarification, when I said derail, I said I didn't mean to derail it by asking a legal question, so that context matters. So your amendment does not adjust general procedure. It specifically targets the duties of the mayor. And I know that Councilman McCormick just disputed that, but if you see the draft ordinance, it says powers and duties of the mayor of the town of La Plata. So it spells it right there. So how do you justify altering the role that the public, our voters, voted for midterm in a way that directly affects the sitting mayor rather than just improving broader structural process?
Sure. So yes, I'll be the first one to tell you it is a charter amendment for section 4-3, which in fact says power and duties. That's what my motion was, to remove section F of that, defining who the presiding officer is. When the voters elected us, they elected us to have the legislative power in the town of La Plata. There are going to be, and no disrespect to the voters, this is just how the process works. There is going to be things that members or the body collectively agree on or disagree, pass law, ordinances, or unordinance. Not only is, and you said, why wait until midterm? Because I mentioned the behaviors. I mean, that we have seen quite often, and mainly Mayor James, particularly when motions are made, I still have the floor. That's not how our rules work. When point of orders are made, you fail to hear them. I mean, that's a fact. And why wait until next time? Why not correct the problem that we see now, in my opinion?
And thank you, and that is your opinion, and thank you for the point of order. We never adopted Robert's Rules of Order, so that is how we.
Well, in our rule of procedures, it spells out how a point of order is supposed to be heard. So not talking about Robert's orders, we're talking about the town council rule of procedure.
3 more questions for you. So we just talked about a midterm structural change that directly affects the voters. And to a reasonable person, it is significant that a man is proposing a midterm change that would in effect place a man in charge.
Are you
A reasonable
casting?
person.
Well, point of order. Let's test this. Point of order.
A point of order.
Point of order.
Could you
There's a point of
please?
order.
I got your point of order. Could you please tell me what the
Yes.
procedure that is being violated
Yes.
under their web? I'm
Casting-
asking a question.
Casting characteristics about a man
I'm sorry.
presenting the resolution. I am a man. I identify as a
Okay.
man. My name is Councilman Tajon Johnson. That is a male name. I happen to propose that. Councilman Gutenberg proposed a off-road vehicle ordinance. Mayor James, who happened to be a female, proposed a tourism ordinance. So just, so point of order, characteristics are in the town council rule of procedures.
Okay,
So we're not going to bring identity or gender into what's being proposed or what's not being proposed.
so are you okay with saying that I say councilman
Or
instead of?
You can, I think the
But I
way
think the way that our charter reads, it says councilman.
we're going to go with our rule of procedures. What is being proposed, it is very clear. I have no problem owning it. I believe your behavior is outrageous as a presiding officer.
Okay.
I made the motion and I also put forward the agenda item.
Your point of order was recognized, so if I can finish my 3 more questions. So to a reasonable person, it's significant that it was proposed, the only proposal that is going to take place takes a female, may take a female out of the presiding officer. Do the residents want this change, or is it 4 council members seeking to change the duties and the responsibilities of the mayor for their own benefit? So I'm going to ask you and not ask the other 3 since you introduced this. So you have stated on the record several times that you don't agree with the way that I preside over the meeting. That is your opinion. But all of a sudden, it is now being changed, which will put someone else arguably someone else in charge because you're stripping the duties of the
Yeah.
mayor.
No way in my agenda item summary or comments did I say I have a problem with females or I don't want females in it. I think you're portraying something that that will get people interested in the conversation. Your question is, how do we know the residents don't want it? State law spells out the referendum process. So if residents referendum this and they meet the qualifications for a referendum, I think this council will know that the voters don't want this. Minus what you're portraying this about being a gender, which is again a lack of good judgment. Because nowhere have I said this is about a gender. You happen to be a female, sure, that's the fact. Secondly, arguably you said you won't be there. I think the language, any member up here can be nominated and appointed to be the presiding officer. I believe, and anyone watching can see that you continue to lack good judgment as presiding officer based on just your comments now.
It's a discussion, and I believe under the rules.
You
of
answered the
procedure,
question I
I am, and it's a discussion. So have you read the proposed ordinance?
Of course I did.
And do you agree with it wholeheartedly?
I agree with the way that it's written.
The way that it's written, that you do. So just the language that is written, you agree with?
I don't know how many times I can say
Okay,
yes.
I
I
just
agree
want
with
to
it.
make sure.
I mean, it's nothing to make
because-
sure. I answered your question.
Okay, so the amended section 13-4. As you just said, you agree with it. States that the council chair shall preserve strict order and decorum. He shall state every question coming before the council. That's the language that you just agreed and approved. So if a reasonable person reads this, knowing that you have read this, you just said you agree with the language, that would conclude, based on what you just said, that if a female elected official is serving, she will never have an opportunity to be chosen as president of a council. Was that language intentional, or was it just a Freudian slip?
I didn't draft the language, so I can't speak for that, but
But you just approved the language.
no, I didn't prove nothing. I say I agree with the way that it's
I-
written.
Yes.
So now
okay.
that you highlight that because you're looking for gotchas, it was just, by the way, not going to work for me, maybe somebody else. Now that you brought that to attention, I'm sure any member of council or even Mr. Stevens, who's up here speaking, who has, I think, what is called as a scrivener's error, the ability to correct that language. Now that you brought it up, instead of trying to play gotcha, but you won't get me. But great try.
Well,
Yeah, that's what it was.
No, that wasn't a got you. I just wanted to make sure that.
I am.
for the
I'll say it again. Yes, I agree with the records.
That you approved the language. It
I
was
didn't-
on the record.
I didn't approve no
I
language.
just-
The
and you
language,
just said It was written.
I
you
agree with
approved
it. I did not say I
You
approved
agreed.
it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you
Again,
agreed with it.
Yeah, but
So
you
that
could
is-
cast the narrative to
Okay.
be what you want.
Then one more question. Your charter amendment, the charter amendment states that the council chair is elected at each organizational meeting. Our organizational meeting happens in May, and our next one's not 2029. And you recognize that because now it's being introduced a resolution to create a one-time process so that the council chair can be elected immediately after the amendment becomes effective, not at the organizational meeting, as your own amendment requires. So to a reasonable person, this appears less like a governance improvement and more like a personal
It is.
effort. Okay, well, that's good that you have put that on the record, that it is personal and it's
You're
not in
responsible.
the,
Yeah.
and again, your opinion. So that is fine. So okay. Thank you for
But-
answering my questions. That brings much clarity to the ordinance.
Sure.
And
I do have a comment reference to organization meeting. I believe in one of the resolutions is spelled out the organization meeting for this purpose will occur in May of 2027, not May of 2029.
oh, thank
I
you.
know what the normal practice is usually when council begins, but the resolution says May of 2027, if I'm not mistaken.
Thank you for that. So brings much clarity to this ordinance. As you have just stated, it's personal. So to a reasonable person, they see that, but they don't even have to be reasonable. You stated that. Your actions suggest you, and maybe other members of the council, I'm not going to speak for them, again, may have a problem with a woman in a leadership role. The perception exists because no neutral, structural, or historical justification has been provided for changing a system that worked for 64 years, except now, which is under a female mayor. So thank you for that. And thank you for being honest and saying it
Yeah.
is personal.
Yeah.
with that.
Can-
Is there any other discussion?
Yes, thank you.
I'm sorry.
Can I go real quick?
Yeah, please.
Thank you for answering those questions. One, I admit, and nothing has been a secret, I proposed this charter amendment. And two, when I say personal, it's personal because I believe that you lack the judgment to be presiding officer. And personal in the fact that I take good governance serious. And I made my comments clear. You fail to hear motions. You fail to hear point of orders. You cast on a false narrative that's not out there about this being a woman or man thing. That's not what it is. It's about ensuring that council meetings operate in the most efficient way possible. You have shown multiple times. I mean, back in last year, May, when we got sworn in, agendas are administrative in nature by design. And you say we didn't take our oath serious. You lack, in my opinion, good judgment of being a responsible presiding officer. So, and personal in terms of that, I take it serious about good governance, but not about you being a female as you portray that you want to take this as.
And thank you for stating your opinion. In my opinion, and to a reasonable person, it does seem like you have a
Okay.
problem with
I
people.
understand. I just disagree with your comments.
That's okay. And I disagree with yours. Councilman Goodberg.
Yes. So two things I'd like to say. One, I appreciate you saying what you said, Councilman Johnson, about gender not coming into this. And I think it's unfortunate that that is an argument being used because following that same logic, let me pull the same thread for you. One could say of you that you're worried that there's a 50-50 chance in a future vote there could be a person of color. And I don't believe that's true, Mayor James. No, but
Just like Councilman Johnson did, when you're doing a character assassination, it is written,
No.
Point of
I'm
order.
giving an
Point of
analogy.
order.
Sure, go ahead.
It's written. Gender, he, it is written. It does not take into color,
Yes.
does not take into race, does not take into religion. So your character
Right.
assassination.
No, that is not what I'm doing. I am not assassinating character. I am pulling this thread of the logic that's being applied here. First of all, in the meeting that we had in April, I remember we all discussed that we agreed that the languages written in the charter should be updated to be gender neutral. Nobody is against that. And so as things are updated, I think those opportunities are going to be taken. And I agree. It's unfortunate that specific word, it's right for you to call that out. That absolutely should be updated in this. And there's opportunity to do that, and we should do it. The thing that I'm saying to you is that ascribing that as somebody's intent is to do this because of a gender involved is not the issue that's being discussed. We're here to talk about the issue. And so my drawing the analogy of saying, well, someone using that same logic of avoiding the issue, but saying, well, the obvious thing is here is I'm the only person that is a gender of a woman.
Point of order.
It's not, go ahead.
It is written, and Councilman Johnson said he agreed with
So-
the way it was written. I specifically asked it 3 times. and
Here,
he got
James.
a little irritated. Hold on.
But
He
you
got a
haven't
little-
cited what the procedure is in the point of order that you're upset with, other than you just disagreeing with me.
No,
And we're allowed to disagree with each other.
we are absolutely going to disagree with it. But the ordinance that was presented to us right here is the only thing that we can go by.
Yes, and I know that you are focused on that, and that's okay. But
It's the written word.
yes, and I'm agreeing with you that that should be changed. And I also believe from previous discussions we've all had is that nobody here believes that shouldn't be changed and updated.
But it
So
was supposed to be changed now and it wasn't.
Okay.
So was that intentional?
I'm
Or was
not,
that-
well, because I'm sitting here to discuss the issue, the broader issue. I'm choosing not to go down into that part. And so we're going back and forth here, but I was recognized to make 2 points. And so the other point that I would like to make about how changing things midterm, like people did not vote for this change. What I want to remind the council and anyone listening is that when you were elected, you were the town's CEO and town manager. And after the election, the council voted to take that role away from you and give it to Miss Minor. And then the council subsequently voted to change the charter and make it so that going forward in the future, La Plata would always have a professional town manager that is hired. And so that is a contradiction to the way this is being presented. We have adjusted and arguably, I would say that was a far more significant change in duties and roles than what we're talking about here. And the thing that I do like about being able to vote for a presiding officer that rules on procedure as we conduct meetings is that it's performance based. And as we, as a council, as a body, we understand the interactions that are taking place in ways that are not discussed during elections. And just automatically having the role of the presiding officer rest in the elected member of the 5-member council, who in every other way has equal voting responsibilities. It is not harmful to the discussion process or the debate process or what the final outcomes are to have changes by the body allowing itself to review and elect a member to serve that function. And that,
And
sure.
Just to go back to a point that you made for correction to make sure that it's the record reflects what actually happened on May 20th. The council did not vote to remove me as CEO and appoint Ms. Minor. I am the one who said I am stepping down, and it is documented. Then, and I never argued this, it says as soon as I am no longer in the role of CEO, the stipend stops. But Councilman Johnson brought that motion up. So on the record, the motion is that the stipend was stopped, but I am the one who introduced that and handed that. It was not the role of council. So for the records, let's get that straight on that one. All right. Any other discussion? Councilman McCormick?
Yeah, so again, let's go back to the 2 questions that every council has to face. First, can we do this? I haven't heard a single argument from Mayor James that we cannot legally do this. Okay, we can absolutely do this, which leads to question 2, should we? And again, I think the exchange between Councilman Johnson and Mayor James is just a great microcosm into the reason and reasons that we should do this. For example, Mayor James took an oath of office to support the charter of the town of La Plata. Well, in section C3-2, qualifications of a councilman, it states that a council member shall reside in the ward from which he seeks to be elected. I guess you didn't recognize the Ward 3 representative on the last council then with that logic. Again, it doesn't stand to reason that because we have what I would argue, as this whole council argued back in May, that we have outdated language, that suddenly nullifies or goes against the intent, the reason, or legality of what is being presented today. What rule will you be citing? Because it's not an argument. What rule will you be citing?
I'm sorry. Question the personal. So that is, you said that
Point of order.
he
Point of order.
went,
Is there a rule of personal privilege in our town council rule of procedures?
it is,
When we cast character, did we cast character?
yes, because he is
Okay, so you believe he's casting
my
character?
opinion. When you are bringing up something that says C-3, councilmen should be there, we're not talking about that. We are talking about the ordinance that was presented to us tonight for consideration. We all acknowledged since the beginning of time when that language needs to be changed, pronouns need to be changed and updated. The question here is, and I asked it and I will ask it, and I will state it again, is the language.
You're
that
taking
was
the floor for
presented-
discussion time now.
I am clarifying. Please wait to be acknowledged by the presiding officer. Councilman McCormick, you are bringing in outside things to try to make your case. The only thing we're talking about tonight, right now, is the ordinance that is presented. That is where it was vetted by the attorney, vetted by the town manager, and even to Councilman Johnson, he said he agrees with the language. Yet it's still, I'm not calling it a Scrivener's, because it was reviewed by several people.
Okay, let's try this again real quick. The logical argument that you made with Councilman Johnson was because the specific language presented by staff here tonight only used the gendered term he, that Councilman Johnson must believe that no woman can hold that office. That is the argument you made. I am now pulling on that logical thread. You have supported in your oath of office a charter that states that he will serve based off of the ward that they're elected at when it comes to council members. The logic here, Mayor James, is that your argument doesn't stand to basic scrutiny, and a reasonable person would understand that, one, we could clearly change that language to write he or she, and two, when it comes to the English language, since you brought up Webster's dictionary earlier, when you have a single pronoun and it is non-gendered, it actually goes to the male term. So again, there's nothing sexist, there's nothing out of control here with Councilman Johnson stating that he agrees with this language. That is the logical thread I'm pulling on. That is the argument I'm making. The other thing that we have to do here is, again, when I talked about the microcosm between the conversation that Mayor James and Councilman Johnson just had, as a reason why I will certainly be supporting this now, is the conversation you and I just had. I asked you specifically, what rule will you be citing for your point of order? And you couldn't. You then stated, I'm taking a point of personal privilege. And when Councilman Johnson says point of order, where in the rules of procedure is that you ignore, continue a debate, and then just move forward? You are not presiding, in my opinion, with good judgment, good character, good faith. You are not representing, in my opinion, the people of La Plata. You are utilizing your ability as the presiding officer to rule, or more importantly, in several instances throughout the last year plus, not rule on points of orders because you know you have made a mistake when it came to your judgment and your ruling. In fact, just last meeting, we had the first time in my memory that we had a point of order that you almost didn't recognize. Councilman Gutenberg then asked for an appeal from the council, and instead of just going through the normal rules of procedure and ruling as a presiding officer, you turned to staff and asked them for clarity as to what needs to happen. Councilman Gutenberg brought up a great point earlier in his discussion, and I hope it doesn't get lost. The conversation we're having here is about, one, accountability to the council, And two, performance-based metrics. Right now, the council does not have the ability, if a presiding officer is not following the rules of procedure, to remove him or her from that position and to put somebody else who would follow the rules of procedure that the five of us agreed to enact the will of not just this council, but the 10,000 residents of La Plata. Again, when you ask your questions earlier, how is this written? Mr. Stevens gives a great historical document. This is how it was written. Staff comes up with the actual language, has written it, and presents it to the council. Who wrote it? Asked and answered. Who reviewed it? Our town attorney. So when I go through the two questions again, and this is the important part for folks at home, and Mayor James just admitted to this. One, this is a power the council has. We can absolutely enact this change. Two, should we, you continue to prove why we should every single Tuesday we come here.
Thank you very much. And also, point of clarification, I did not ask Mr. Stevens what to do when we had that. He said, may I interject? And that's the way it was. So if you could maybe get your facts straight, we are just talking facts, and check your emotion, that would be better. All right, any further discussion? Go ahead, Councilman Sampson.
Okay, so after listening to everything, I think we need to refocus and as you just stated, bring down the temperature on this. I heard earlier about things not being done in 64 years. There's a lot of things that has not been done in this town in a long time. One of the things that I constantly hear, and I'm not ascribing this to anybody, I'm just making a general statement, is that things were always done, you know, in a good old boy fashion, behind closed doors. And one of the things that I do like about this council, and that includes everybody on the council, is that we have been more transparent. And the reason I bring up that 64-year period is only to say this. We never had an adequate public facilities ordinance and since the town's been founded. But this council did it. All right. You brought up the tourism policy. Wasn't done before. This council did it. All right. Taking care of our police officers. This council did it. And I could go down the list of things that this council has done that no other council has done before. So doing something for the first time seems to be the culture of this council, and that's everybody on the council. All right. So to me, that's not a relevant point. The question is, okay, and I think the mayor brought up a good point. Is this a duty that the residents expected? Okay. Number one, is there a harm? Is there a benefit? Okay. Running the meeting, clearly there's no harm. The question is there any benefit? Okay. The mayor is the mayor, regardless of who runs the meeting. There is only one mayor, right? We all know that. It's built right into the charter. So in my mind, that does not change at all. As far as the residents, I can only speak for my personal opinion. I don't think the residents care who runs the meeting personally. I think just like this past constituent came in and said, what are we doing for them is what they care about, not us running our meetings. All right. And so getting things done like the off-road vehicles, like use of the town hall for governmental, intergovernmental events, I think that's what they care about. And so when it comes to benefit, there is a benefit in possibly different people running a meeting. Okay. Also, there is no indication, all right, that I've heard that would prohibit or say, even if this goes forward, that you still wouldn't run the meeting. Everything is presumptuous right now. All right. I mean, you brought up an excellent point. Just last meeting about how you were involved in a lot of committees and all that stuff in mail. So there's still an open question about that. And just to address the other issue, and this is not a personal attack or anything. We, as a group, have been led in the sense as a presiding officer by a female. And all this got done. So this idea that somehow we're attacking, stopping, discriminating, prohibiting, you gotta take credit for it. I mean, I don't understand the argument. It was under the presiding officer of a female that all this that I'm saying that we did got done. So if the argument, if that is the argument, that argument, as they say, where I grew up, that dog don't hunt. All right. I mean, I think the only question before us is there any benefit to this? Right? Is there any benefit to this? And that's what I would ask the council to consider. Is there a benefit, or are we just wasting time? And that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Councilman Sampson. Go ahead,
Thank you.
Councilman Johnson.
Thank you. So just to wrap up this conversation, or at least on my end, I submitted the agenda item summary. I made the motion that night to provide explicit dates and thereof language of what come back on the agenda item summary. Nowhere did I say it was to be gender specific. So for that to come up into the conversation as, in my opinion, as a gotcha moment, was shocking, and is quite frankly unbelievable. It's unfortunate as in the ordinance, and I will even offer to go out on a limb and say that there was no harm intent by staff to put that language there. But I believe if you get into the details of the ordinance itself, one of the lines is on 29 of 13-4, or excuse me, ordinance 2619, page 1. All members of the town council, including the mayor, shall be eligible to vote the council chair. So I believe gender language just happened to be a mishap that I believe is no harm, but I do agree with the ordinance is written under the fact that word needs to come out. Because it kind of contradicts yourself, but I will offer, and I'm with this time I'm gonna speak on you, Mr. Stevens. I don't believe there was any harm intent with the word he after reading the whole ordinance. So I did make the motion. I did bring forward the agenda item summary. I stated my reasons why. But I think that word he is just a mishap. But again, in the ordinance itself, all members of the town council, including the mayor, shall be eligible to vote and be elected as the council chair. So I don't believe there's any gender specific nuances in that particular ordinance as you read the context of the ordinance itself.
Thank you, Councilman Johnson. That was not in dispute at all from me. Councilman McCormick?
Yes, I just want to answer Councilman Sampson's question because he did ask it to the council. So the question was, is this something that benefits the residents? And I would argue the way that this language is written, it's an unequivocal yes. Let me give 2 examples why. First was something that Councilman Johnson brought up earlier. We have a presiding officer right now who, based off an item that was going to be included on the agenda, when it came to a charter amendment or a charter change or a resolution that we were taking a vote on, sent the question to our town attorney outside for, the Tuesday meeting, the dais, the public record, that resulted in that item that we were told that was going to be put on the agenda was now removed from the agenda by our town manager. And that delayed a conversation that, one, when we found out what the question was, as I stated that night, that question had already been asked and answered. And then 2, it delays the residents from having their elected officials vote on issues that we are voted into office to represent them on behalf. So that's the first tangible benefit that we would get right here. The second tangible benefit is what occurred in the violation of the rules of procedure that was talked about just last Tuesday. And that is that the majority will of the council must be carried out. And this council made a determination that you as the presiding officer and you as the mayor of the town did not do that when it came to the Safer Coalition Act. Again, a direct benefit. We would have had Councilman Gutenberg sitting on that commission as the council's will. But because of actions taken, a reasonable person would conclude that there was a change to that. And now we don't have Councilman Gutenberg sitting on that commission. So again, to answer your question very specifically, Councilman Sampson, does this benefit the residents of La Plata? 100%. And the reason why The underlying logic here is what Councilman Gutenberg brought up almost 30 minutes ago. And that was, we need a presiding officer who is accountable to the council. Right now, we do not have that ability. With this legislation, we would. The final piece I want to bring up is the piece that I think everybody has discussed, but it's important to ensure that it's on the record, which is any one of the 5 of us can run for the presiding officer role. What's happening there for the first time in La Plata's history, for the first time in 15 councils, 7 mayors, 64 years, is that the 5 individuals that run these meetings and discuss these items are going to pick an individual who is now beholden to them. So I think that's very important. It's a very good change for the town of La Plata, as this exact staff report states. It meets our intent and our need for good governance. And frankly, this is a really good piece of legislation that is going to benefit the folks of La Plata.
Thank you. Just a point of clarification again for you, Councilman McCormick. It was the town manager that sent the question on resign to run to the attorney, and it was after a meeting. That's absolutely right, because the email that the town manager had sent to us said, please let me know if you have any questions. So adhering to his statement, it was sent to him. He sent it to the attorney. The attorney did not have enough time to turn it around and answer it. That's why it wasn't on the agenda. Not any request that I have. So it sounded like your intent was to lead a reasonable person down that path, that I am the one who asked for it to not be on the agenda that week. And it was actually the town manager and the attorney that did that, not me. Second of all, you mentioned something very important, and I want to drill down on this. So you mentioned will of the council. So you support, if it is the will of the council, you will support whatever the will of the council is. Is that correct?
Yes, and
Okay.
yes.
I don't need any explanation. It was a yes, no. So if it is the will of the council, that's what should be supported. And that's all I need. Any other further discussion on 6.4?
Yeah, I'll just fire the question back to you. Do you support the will of the council?
Absolutely. If it's the will of the council, doesn't mean that I agree with it. But if it is the will of the council,
Okay,
that's the will of the council.
I guess I'll just ask a question for you again. Was I censured last Tuesday? I mean, no, right? And again, here's the issue. Okay, thank you.
Person who read any of those emails will come to the conclusion that I'm not MDOT. So.
Okay, so then here leads the question. So you just stated that a reasonable person would come to that conclusion. Are you now stating that the 4 of us are unreasonable?
You can take my words, twist them any way you want. But the will of the council.
It just sounds like only one person does not agree with the will of the council is the argument I'm making.
That is it working. Thank you. It is very important that you said on the record you do support the will of the council. So that's all I needed. All right, moving on to legislation. Mr. Stevens, 7.1.
Okay, council, good evening. Ordinance 26-17, Chapter 181, Vehicles and Traffic. This is your second reading for consideration of adoption. This is an ordinance concerning Chapter 181, Vehicles and Traffic, for the purpose of creating a public nuisance, unregistered off-road vehicle enforcement and accountability code by amending Chapter 181, Vehicles and Traffic, to provide definitions, operational prohibitions, notice-based nuisance enforcement, parental and guardian responsibility, fuel point of sale restrictions, impoundment and release protocols, and administrative appeal process and penalties, and all matters generally relating thereto.
Thank you very much. Do I have a motion to adopt ordinance 26-17 as presented?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Just for the record, in favor of this ordinance, but cannot vote for it the way that it is written. So we do need this, but I will be voting nay based on the verbiage that we have already discussed. So if you are in favor, any other discussion? If you are in favor of this ordinance, please indicate by saying aye. If not, nay. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Nay. Motion carries. Brings us to ordinance 26-18.
This is ordinance 26-18, fiscal year 2026 budget amendments and reassignments, fiscal closeout. This is the second reading for consideration of adoption. This is an ordinance concerning the town of La Plata fiscal year 2026 budget amendments and reassignments, fiscal closeout. For the purpose of amending the town of La Plata fiscal year 2026 financial plan/budget and all matters generally relating thereto.
Thank you very much. Do I have a motion to adopt ordinance 26-18 as presented?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Ordinance 26-19.
Okay, this is ordinance 26-19, chapter 13, council. This is the first reading for introduction only. This is an ordinance concerning chapter 13, council. For the purpose of amending chapter 13 of the code of the town of La Plata to define the qualifications, duties, and responsibilities of the council chair and the method by which a temporary presiding officer shall be elected in the absence of the council chair and all matters generally relating thereto.
Thank you very much. Brings us to ordinance 26-20.
This is ordinance 26-20, chapter 191, zoning ordinance for the town of La Plata, Maryland, accessory dwelling units. This is the first reading for introduction. This is an ordinance concerning chapter 191, zoning ordinance for the town of La Plata, Maryland, accessory dwelling units for the purpose of amending section 191-53B of chapter 191, zoning of the La Plata Municipal Code pertaining to accessory dwelling units or ADUs to ensure compliance with recent changes to Maryland law governing accessory dwelling units and all matters generally relating thereto.
Thank you very much. Brings us to ordinance 26-21.
This is ordinance 26-21, amendment to the town of La Plata fiscal year 2027 fee schedule. This is the first reading for introduction. This is an ordinance concerning an amendment to the town of La Plata fiscal year 2027 fee schedule for the purpose of amending the fiscal year 2027 fee schedule dealing with the fees set by the town of La Plata and all matters generally relating thereto.
Thank you very much. Brings us to resolution 26-56.
This is resolution 26-56, town hall use policy for introduction and consideration of adoption. This is a resolution concerning the town hall use policy for the purpose of adopting a policy reserving town hall for the conduct of official town business and defining the limited circumstances under which the building may otherwise be used and all matters generally relating thereto.
All right. Thank you very much. Brings us to new business. Councilman Gutenberg.
I really didn't have much to say tonight, but
Point of order, real quick.
yeah, I'm sorry. New business?
No, 7.6 is a resolution, isn't it?
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you very much.
Yep.
Do I have a motion to adopt resolution 26-56 as presented?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Now, Councilman Gutenberg, a
Yeah.
report.
Yeah, I really didn't have much to say for tonight, but I think I'll just say this. I'm sure that people are frustrated watching the conduct of these meetings, and I hope that all of us, some of us more than others, but I hope all of us, especially just the last few minutes, I think was a little out of line where things went. And I think, some time should be spent thinking about how we talk about issues with each other. and keeping it more to the issues. Scoring political points is kind of silly when you consider the size of La Plata's politics, if that's what this really is, right? You know, we'd be better off just sticking to the issues, you know, working hard on that. I'm not saying I'm perfect there either. But I will say we can all try, and some of us need to try harder than others. I'll just leave it at that.
Councilman McCormick?
Yeah, so first comment for the business of the council is Mr. Stevens, you, myself, I believe we extended an invite to Councilman Gutenberg and Director Dooley will be meeting next Monday, if I have that correct, regarding HPC issues. The reason why Councilman Gutenberg's being invited, just so the council understands, is he obviously sat in that seat beforehand. We like to use his expertise and see his ideas because he did have a direct hand in formulating that plan. And I just want to caveat off Councilman Gutenberg's comments because I agree, and I'm going to apologize for the last question that I asked there. I totally agree. It was out of line. But I do want to explain something here, which is when we're talking about the issues themselves, right? I hope the folks at home are really listening to who's providing cogent arguments like, can we do this? Should we do this? Does it benefit the folks of the town? And who muddies up the issue. And then when somebody goes down to that level and engages and gets stuck there, that's really the distraction that, frankly, I think that folks are getting upset with. So I totally agree. I apologize for my conduct when it came to the last 45 seconds there in the discussion. But what I would bring up again is the actual issue itself has been resolved. It's been resolved very clearly, and I look forward to the discussion next Tuesday or September 8th. Thank you.
Councilman Sampson? Johnson?
No comments, thank you.
And I do have several things. I was honored to attend the swearing in of our newest associate judge of the District Court of Maryland for Charles County. And it was so nice to see Liz actually become a judge. She is so accomplished. She is so immersed into Charles County. You get to learn a little bit about someone when they are talking about their history here. She is a transplant to Charles County, but boy, you wouldn't know that. And I think the one thing I took away from that is she really does get involved in the community. And she used to be on at Port Tobacco Players, so you could have seen her acting there. But I wish her, she is very worthy of this. Congratulations, Judge Theobald. She will do an amazing job for Charles County. School started Monday, so just yesterday. So I just would like to remind the residents when the bus stop sign is there, just be patient, plan ahead. And yes, there is going to be more traffic in La Plata, especially at between 7 and 7:30 in the morning. So just plan accordingly and let's get these students safely to school. Concerts, since we last met, I've attended 2 concerts here at Town Hall, and sadly, our summer concert series is coming to an end this Friday. But the Sidleys were a family group that were amazing. They played a little bit of everything, but Michael Christopher and the Country Coastal was this past Friday, and they had some boot scooting out there. People were really dancing, and they are a very accomplished traveling country. They're country artists there. This Friday will be, we've got to just hope we have good weather. It's going to be Bobby McKee's, and this one always draws many, many people here. So kudos to Lucinda for really booking such a variety of bands this year. It was a lot of fun. So if you missed it, please don't miss this Friday. You want to end with a bang. And then the last thing is our next scheduled meeting will be on September 8th. So I hope you all have a wonderful weekend, a great Labor Day, and just be safe out there. And I conclude this meeting at 8:31. Thank you so much.